Floating in Copenhagen's harbor, just steps away from the doors of Noma, is the Nordic Food Lab. Part research station, part test kitchen, the converted houseboat is a dedicated workspace for the lab's experiments with local ingredients from the Nordic region. On board the Nordic Food Lab, director Michael Bom Frøst and researcher Josh Evans show us some of their latest work.
The Nordic Food Lab is a self-governing institution founded in 2008 by the head chef of Noma, and Klaus Meyer, a gastronomical entrepreneur. And our purpose is to explore the raw materials of the Nordic region and the culinary traditions and the culinary techniques and iterate on them and disseminate the results of this journey of discovery to the world, to chefs, to home cooks, to industry, so that they can be inspired and take up their ideas and develop them further into new Nordic products.
And these are some of the products that we've been working on over the past few years. The lab was founded in 2009, and since then we've been exploring, trying to explore as widely as possible all of the different edible products in our region. And we use edible in a very broad sense, because often we'll come across something that either isn't immediately edible or doesn't have a tradition of being eaten, but it still tastes very good, or it has the potential to taste very good. And that's our approach, as we say, what is delicious out there, or what seems like it could be delicious, and how can we use that as a starting point and then try and end up at a place where it becomes a food that is edible and celebrated. Seaweed was one of the first projects that the lab was interested in, because there's a huge diversity of seaweeds all over the world, and that's equally true in the North Atlantic and Baltic seas. And seaweeds are interesting for many reasons. They have an abundance of umami taste in many different forms. They can have a variety of different flavors as well. And they also have very different hydrocolloidal or tensioactive properties. Many of the hydrocolloids that we use are actually refined from seaweeds, like agar and Irish moss and a lot of these other things. And that's because of their evolutionary history. They needed a way to maintain their structure in a constantly aqueous environment, and also to be able to manage salt concentrations and all of these sorts of things. We were primarily interested in this at first for umami taste. And these are two examples of seaweeds that we became very involved with. The first is a red algae called dulse. The Danish name is so. It's a very hard word to say.
Very Danish word.
And it's a beautiful. It's the first thing you notice that it's just very beautiful. It's this beautiful red purple color, and it has all sorts of different forms. This is when it's quite young, and it has these small, sort of fingers coming off of it. And as it grows, it will become much larger, and you'll get these larger pieces like this. And some of it we actually age for, well, this has been aging for 2 years. And when you age it, the proteins start to break down. You get free amino acids, which is what makes it taste umami, and you get this sweetness because some of the amino acids taste sweet, and all of the flavors start to develop and complexify, and it allows you to, it sort of unlocks this whole new world just by letting it sit.
It's not traditionally being used in the Nordic region, but it has a lot of potential as a flavor enhancer, as an element in creating a Nordic dashi, if you want to say it that way.
Mm-hmm. And we've used it in a variety of different foods already, in very common foods like bread and cheese, and making soup stocks with it, and using it to marinate meats in. And it has all these different applications. And
ice cream.
Ice cream is like the best. Ice cream from this is fantastic because so often, especially in Western cuisine, umami taste is almost always in a savory context. In meats and in hard cheeses and all of these things. There's very little in the way of umami paired with sweetness, but that's a very interesting way to try and further understand what umami taste really is. Because if it's always paired with saltiness, you are only ever really going to experience it as like a salty thing, because it's a little harder to pinpoint if you didn't sort of grow up with this understanding of what it is. And so by making an ice cream with it, we aren't just making something that is delicious, because everyone likes ice cream, but we're also making a way to try and identify what umami taste is. This is especially interesting for chefs, to try and gain a more complex and more thorough understanding of umami taste by divorcing it from the saltiness that's so familiar as a pairing and having it be in a sweet context. It's also a great way to get people to try it that would otherwise think seaweeds are gross or weird. And this is something that we come up against again and again, where something like seaweed, people have this a lot of people in cultures where there isn't a tradition of using seaweeds will experience it as not a food, because they only ever experience it as something that's rotting on the beach that has flies on it. Yes, that stinks and is just not that good. But that's like saying, oh, I don't like apples, if you go through an apple orchard and all you ever look at is the rotting apples on the ground, and you never look up into the apples that are beautiful on the tree. And so we try and showcase how fantastic things like seaweeds and wild plants and insects can be in their best form. This is another seaweed that we're really interested in. It's much more robust than the sole, which is can be very delicate. This is a salt made from this, which is kelp, in the Laminaria genus, sugar kelp, kombu, yeah. And this one is indigenous to the North Atlantic and grows elsewhere as well. This one is invasive. This one is from the Pacific and has made its way here from tankers shipping. And so the best thing we can do is to eat it, basically. And so we've worked a lot with this as well. And one of the best things that one of the most versatile applications we've found for it is to make a salt out of it by making a very simple tea, making a dashi out of it, and then dehydrating the tea. And the salts crystallize. And it's very strong, so you only need a little bit. And we can use this just like using salt. Instead of using a simple sodium chloride, you can use this, which in fact is more potassium chloride than sodium chloride. So for people who are afraid of consuming too much salt in their diet, this is different at a chemical level and will function differently in your body. We actually have some fresh sole as well. That's what it looks like when it's fresh. It's quite beautiful.
And some of the investigations we've done have been actually published in a scientific journal about when we try to do these, try to compare Nordic seaweeds with Japanese seaweeds in terms of how much umami taste they bring about and how many umami compounds are in them. So you can say that some of them are quite comparable, and they give. So you could easily take our local seaweed and do the same with them as you would do with an imported kombu.
And so we have a different seaweed. We don't actually have any of the original seaweed right now, but it's called Gracilaria. And Gracilaria is the seaweed that agar is refined from. And so Justine actually has been exploring making our own agar, which it turns out is very possible. To make an agar that is just as strong and just as colorless as an agar that you would get that was industrially refined. This is Gracilaria after it's been bleached in the sun. So usually it's a deep purple color, and it's very sort of stringy. It looks like hair almost. But after treating it, and you can treat it with lye water, or you can treat it just in plain water and it will take longer, but you can bleach it, leave it out in the sun, and it will turn white like this. And once you do that, you cook it, and then you make a gel, and then you dehydrate the gel. Simplifying steps, of course, but that's the basic idea. And then you get something like this, which is a very thin sheet of agar. And you can use this just as you would use agar. Of course, it's a lot easier to just call up your supplier and buy agar, but that's not, we're not always concerned with what's easiest. We're concerned with what's most delicious and with what says the most about the area that we are. If we can make our own agar from seaweeds that are in our waters, why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we trying to make different types of agar out of different seaweeds? Because many seaweeds share similar properties. Ultimately, our pursuit for deliciousness and our pursuit for diverse applications in the kitchen leads us to diversity in general, biodiversity, more sustainable food systems, a more complex way of thinking about how we make our food and why. The Food Lab and other restaurants and other chefs have really pioneered in this region, looking at what used to be thought of as weeds, but now we talk about them as wild plants. And what currently are talked about as seaweeds, but maybe someday we can talk about as sea vegetables. That's where this connection with language is actually very crucial. And it really informs how we are able to think about and how we're able to interact with them, not just talking about them, but how we actually put things on a plate. If something is thought of as a vegetable or a fruit, you eat that differently than if you think about it as a weed or as like something that is somehow not desired, you know. And that's another part of our work. So fermentation is one of our largest pursuits at the lab because it's so diverse. There's so many different types of fermentation, so many different techniques that we can use to explore new types of flavor. And also, there are different fermentation traditions all over the world. So there's a huge diversity of existing traditions that can be used and reinterpreted in different contexts. So it's a constant source of inspiration for us. This is a deer leg. It started out quite larger than this. And this is about a year and a half old now. It started out as a way to try and make something akin to a prosciutto or a cured leg of ham, but using venison. There's also a similar tradition of this in Norway called fenalår that uses sheep's leg. And so the more Ben was really behind this one, and the more he explored this, the more he saw these connections between preserving meat and mummification, actually, and traditions of preserving human flesh for burial. And so that sort of started getting all these creative juices flowing, and he started combining all these ideas, and this is an example of many different processes layered on top of each other. So we started out with a venison leg, rubbed it with salt to start the curing process and to draw moisture out. Then we rubbed it with whey, which has a lot of lactic acid bacteria in it, so we can start acidifying it to bring down the pH and to inoculate it with bacteria that we want to be growing on this. Then it was sprayed with different resins, which have a lot of antimicrobial properties, so we can try and control the microbial culture. And over time, it loses moisture and the flesh starts to break down. Similar to the seaweed, where the proteins are breaking down, you have all the proteins breaking down in this into amino acids, which is why, again, the source of umami taste. And the more we did this, the less it became like a prosciutto, and the more it became something like a katsuobushi. So this one, we did the same technique, rubbed it with honey and covered it with beeswax, and then you can see that there's a very noticeable difference in size. And these were started at the same time. And so this one is losing moisture much more slowly. But you're still getting all of the complexity of flavor as the fermentation continues. So it's this layering of techniques and trying almost, it's sort of a bricolage really, where you're pulling different ideas from different places, different time periods, different people, different environments, and trying to layer them into something that is composed of all of those things, but is also something more, there's something different entirely. So is this a Norwegian product? Is it a Italian product? Is it a Danish product? That question sort of is irrelevant. It's not an interesting question anymore. What's interesting is, does it taste good? And why does it taste good? And what are all of the sources of inspiration that we've used to make something like this? And I think that goes back to the idea of trying to find a new way to interact with globalization. This wouldn't be possible in a world that wasn't so connected. Because we have access to all of this information and knowledge that we can gather and that we can share, that's how we can make more delicious, more diverse foods.